Programs Director here at the museum. Tonight we have got a heck of a speaker for you guys, Mr. Leo Goff. He is not only a motorcycle aficionado, he is a world-renowned musician. He was telling me earlier that he has played on 143 albums. Isn't that amazing? So that's super cool. He's also an actor. Really, what more could you want out of a speaker? But Leo is coming to us from Memphis, Tennessee, which is where his shop has been since the late 60s. He mainly focuses on British and European bikes, but he can work on all brands, restoration, machining, things of that nature. And of course, he is no stranger to competition as well. So in the mid-'80s, he campaigned a single-engine Norton dragster to a world championship. I'm sure he'll touch on that too. So, guys, please make Mr. Leo welcome.
All right, everybody. Well, she kind of summed it up. At the end of the day, I'm just another motorcycle mechanic. You know, so that's the way I look at it. But I've got this PowerPoint presentation that I do. But what I found out in doing the seminars over the years here during the vintage celebration, if I throw it open to question and answers, it seems to work a lot better. And it kind of keeps you from having to just sit there and hear me just rattle on about stuff that you may or may not be interested in. So I don't have all the answers, but I bet somebody in the room here does to a question you may have. But what I've run into over the last probably 7 or 8 years is that when people were restoring their bikes, they used to never modify the engines. It always go back stock and original, in keeping with a true restoration. But a lot of guys are riding their bikes too. And they're taking their old Triumphs, Nortons, Ducatis, BMWs, old Harleys, just whatever. And they're saying, what can I do? I'm going to go through the engine. What can I do to it to maybe just give it a little edge over my buddies or something, you know? So, or, you know, I want a little more out of it, you know, and a lot of times they end up going overboard and doing things and really hurting the performance of the bike. They're over camming it, or maybe trying to do the port work and just hogging out the ports to a point to where the motor won't run. So I put this little thing together, kind of address some issues and questions about what are the kind of the do's and the don'ts during a good vintage rebuild. And we don't necessarily have to keep it with vintage motors too. We can go anywhere that, then if I don't have the answer, maybe we'll discuss it, or if it's something that's really important, I'll do a little research and I'll get back with you on email if that'll help you. But anyway, all the things you want to consider, you know, ignition. The first thing you want to do is get those old points out of there a lot of times, especially if you're going to be riding a bike a lot. Boyers, tri-sparks. If you got a magneto, a lot of times the magneto's weak or dead. You can do a electronic rebuild in the magneto, and it still looks right, but it's got all the electronic components in it. Boyer makes a very nice setup for that. I just put an electric starter on a old 66 Vela set for a fella, and he already had the electronic ignition in it. Just made a real sweet little ride. Carburation, just about all the carburetors on the old bikes, they're going to have some issues. If it's an Amel carburetor, it's going to be wore out. I'm sure all y'all are familiar with that. On the British stuff that runs Amels, the new Amel Premiers are just a blessing. It's just a revelation. If you got a kind of a mediocre old Triumph Norton BSA twin, you like to ride it, and it's a little hard to start. It doesn't accelerate quite well. It spits and sputters, dies at stop signs, doesn't auto right. Even though it may need a top end rebuild or possibly whole engine rebuild, if you'll put a good carburation on it and a good ignition, it's miraculous. It's an amazing thing. The new Amel Premiers just work wonders. You know, if you're real low for performance, go to the Ken on the Cooney flat slides, but that's, kind of getting away from the vintage thing, but a lot of people do it. Any questions so far?
Comment.
Oh, comment, okay.
You're talking about upgrading ignition and carburetion. I've got a Norton Commando that Leo helped me restore 8 or 10 years ago. It had a fresh engine that had new Amels on it, not the Premiers. And about 3 years ago, we upgraded it to the Premiers and a tri-spark ignition, and it made a different motorcycle. It was like night and day.
It really does. It's amazing what a good ignition. The tri-sparks are they have what's called an idle stabilization circuit in them. And they have a true advance curve rather than just a ramp. The Warriors just kind of have a ramp, and it's kind of one advance curve fits all. The tri-spark is actually a curve and it has some real good features about it. It delivers a good, healthy spark, even with the Lucas coils. The Lucas coils aren't bad, but you can upgrade them with a like a Harley coil, and it really makes a big difference. So, anything else on that subject while we're here? Okay. Move on to the next. Of course, everybody wants to change their exhaust system. Muffler exhaust pipe changes can have a great effect on the performance, especially on some of the newer bikes. But there again, you can have positive and negative results. A lot of times with the old Triumphs, the older bikes, you'll get a situation where if you run an open megaphone, you get into a situation that we used to call megaphone-itis, where you have a bad flat spot around 3,500 to 4,500. That can be annoying sometimes. But a very well-designed exhaust system that can really transform the performance characteristics of the bike. Airbox modifications, air filter changes require the same attention to jetting that the exhaust system does. Some of the newer bikes, if you change the airbox, you're actually going backwards and losing power. I got a call from a fairly well-known motorcycle shop up north that was doing some tuning on the new Triumphs, the new automobiles. And they did a lot of things to it and everything. They go to the dyno and they said, we can't get any power out of this thing. I said, well, tell me what you've done to it. They said, they're doing cams, big bore kit on a T100 Triumph, the fuel injected model. And they had taken the air box off and had put on some K&N air filters, thinking that was going to help the airflow. Well, it did exactly the opposite. The plenum on that Triumph was necessary for the proper tuning, and they had very little leeway on the fuel injection as far as going there and changing the map up. So I said, if you'll take your stock air box off this T100, take the baffle out of it, the sound baffle out of it. Said just put a good air filter in it, put a stock air filter in, or K&N. I said, and take the air inlet out, and there's a company that makes a little velocity go on there. I said, that'll solve your problem. That'll solve your problem. And one of the mechanics was a little skeptical about it, but the owner of the shop said, go on and do it, let's try it. And they did it. It picked the horsepower back up, the drivability came back. The thing produced a tremendous amount of torque because they'd already changed they already had a big bore in it. But they were just, they had kind of outfunked themselves by taking that air box off, thinking that it was a restriction when actually it was not. It was a good, it kind of serves as what we call a Helmholtz resonator on some of this stuff. But anyway, it was necessary to have that on there. But you don't make drastic changes, and you don't do multiple changes. When you're doing tuning, you do one thing at a time. And you got to understand, if it's carburetor, you got to understand what part of the carburetor is controlling the RPM range. You know, in carburation, you have slides you change, you have needles you change. You have needle jets, but you very rarely will change a needle jet. and you have main jets, and you can also tune the carburation through the adjustment of the float level. So what I'll do, I'll just see what the bike's doing, at what RPM it's having a problem at. You want to make sure that you don't get in a situation where it's running lean, where you're going to do any damage. So, generally, we'll start trying to get the low end situated, where the bike has good throttle response. That helps your rideability. That makes the bike fun and friendly to ride. And once you do that with your slides, your low speed jet, your slide and your needles, then you can move on to your main jet to make sure that your upper end, your higher RPM performance is there, so you don't do any damage when you run along. And a little bit at a time, go one way, see how it works. Go the other way, see how it works. Most time you can find you have to go richer across the line, across the board when you're changing pipes and air intake. We start changing cams, start raising your compression ratio, start doing big bores, all that becomes more critical. So that's the way I do it. We had a question up here.
There you go.
You threw out using the floats to tune the car. And
Using the what?
The float.
Oh, okay.
And that's different to me. If you can say when that's something you try and which way you go.
Okay, a float, that's in extreme cases. When you raise the float level, you're richening everything up all the way across. When you lower the float level, you're leaning it down. And you gotta make very, very small adjustments there. Generally, that's not gonna be something you're gonna wanna do on a street bike. On a race bike, sometimes you will. A lot of times when you're running high RPMs around a track like out here at Barber, you're up in high RPMs all the time, and maybe your fuel delivery is not as good as it needs to be. So you raise your float level up a little bit. Try to get a little more fuel available on the top end and everything. Then of course, you got another situation where after you go above peak torque, you have to bring it down lean again. So that's where the air corrector jet comes in. But it's a tuning thing. But float level changes do affect tuning, and that's another reason why even if it's a stock motor, you put new carbs on it, check your float level. A lot of situations can be improved by just making sure everything's what it's supposed to be. Put a new carb on a bike, it's a new carburetor, but go on and take it apart and clean the jets. I mean, you'll see some little swarf trash in there sometimes from where it was manufactured and stuff, and that just because it's new doesn't mean it's right, so before you go to the trouble of putting it on, go ahead and clean it up, make sure it's all good and clean, then put it on. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great, okay. Did you have another, there was a two-part question?
Yeah, earlier on when you were talking about making the changes to the ignition,
Yes.
as far as plug heat range, I assume that stays the same. Do you have any rules of thumb when you're going to like an electronic, as far as changing gap, or you leave them alone, or?
Well, the heat range is going to be pretty much the same, unless you're running a much higher compression. Then you want to maybe put a little cooler plug in it, because as you increase compression, you run into some detonation problems, some pre-ignition problems. The chance of you running in that are greater as you increase your compression ratio. So you want to make sure you don't get into that, because that's a real parts killer. And detonation is just that noise you're hearing is the hammering. It's the uncontrolled explosion of the fuel mixture rather than the controlled burning of the fuel mixture. And it makes a noise, and it'll destroy your whole engine. It does a lot of damage. So if you really intend on doing a lot of modifications to your motor, make sure your, fuel and your timing's right. And that's, and just because you don't hear the detonation or the pinging, doesn't mean you don't have it. So, when it gets to the point where you're hearing it, you really got it. So, always better to err on the side of being rich and running moderate timing figures, not, pretty close to what it is stock, That way you won't tear anything up, you won't hurt anything. And then as you learn the machine and learn the tuning aspects of it, you can play with it there. And, familiarity with what you're running is a big deal. And you think you're familiar with your bike, but you pull it down and you rebuild it, you do a little different cam in it, you do a little different carburetor on it, all of a sudden that familiarity is gone because you've changed all the operating parameters of the engine. So you have to go back and kind of relearn how to deal with something you've probably been dealing with for a long time, but it's changed now. So you just have to keep that in mind. So you have a happy experience with your motor, after you've done some. Anything else on that while we're here? Okay, here we talked about a little bit before, compression ratio increases, cam shaft changes, big bore kits, cylinder head modifications. While we're talking about cylinder head modifications, probably the worst thing you can do is to go in there with a grinder and start trying to port your head. You're going to do more damage to a cylinder head by thinking you're helping it. And once that metal's gone, it's awful hard to put back in there. And you big valves, hot cams on a street bike, probably not the best idea sometimes. You're going backwards. Compression ratio increases. Generally about 10-to-1 is about all you'll be able to stand on some of these motors, some of these older motors, and still have it streetable. I get a lot of Harley guys bringing me their heads off the, even some of the old fan heads and shovel heads won't work, but mostly it's the Evos and the twin cam motors. And they're all wanting to change their cam and do the heads. Well, there is a lot of power to be had in doing port modifications and cam modifications in the new Harleys. You can get an awful lot of usable power. But you can also ruin your brand new engine too if you're not careful. So you gotta beware and stay with people who have a good track record on doing your engine modifications on your new bikes. And just keep in mind that a cam that a guy uses on the drag strip is not the cam you want in your street bike. More people try to over-cam them, put too big a valve in them. A street bike needs to maintain what we call good port inlet velocity. When you lose that velocity, you've got a motor that only run maybe in the last few 100 RPMs top end, and it will produce no torque. It'll be bulky to ride, and takes all the fun out of it. So beware of that. Talk about compression ratio increase. You can have dramatic improvement on power, but if done improperly, it can have catastrophic effects like we talked about. A high compression engine does require a strong ignition, carefully tuned carbs, or remapped injection. On the injection, you can go to Power Commanders. You can go to Tune Boy. You can go to Tune ECU and find some maps that usually will work in conjunction with what someone has spent a lot of time on, the dyno, to work out something. And there again, you gotta be careful of that too. But there's if you go out there and look, you can probably find what you need get your fuel injection remapped. When you do all that, the fuel requirements become critical. You run hot, you're running 10 to 1 or so, you have to run high test gas in all the time, no good, at least a minimum of 91 octane. Like we talked about in the last here, compression ratio exceeding 9.5 to 1 on a lot of older engines, Tribes, BSAs, Nortons, the old Ducatis. You're really pushing it if you try to push it over 9.5 to 1. You can take a Norton reliably up to 10 to 1 because it's got a flat dome piston, it's got a good chamber. But Triumphs, you're about the end of the road, about 9.5 to 1 with any kind of gas you could buy while you're out riding. Any questions on that? We all good? Camshaft. Camshaft technology has come a long ways. I mean, it's amazing what we were doing back in the 60s and 70s as opposed to what we're doing now. But you gotta really be smart in what you're doing. Best way to do is talk to somebody, like it says here, a known professional, familiar with your engine to make the right camshaft choices. There's nothing worse in the world than spending all the money to set your engine up with a camshaft and set the head up. By the way, the head has to be set up to be operating with that camshaft. Springs, what we call installed height on the springs, it all has to work together. And you put all that together and then you got something that's just terrible to ride, that won't idle, won't hardly run below 4,000 or 5,000. So and I see a lot of that every month. Somebody says, "Man, I did this, and said, and it won't get out of the way." You know, my buddy's out running me so hard. It says the only time I can catch him when we get out of the expressway running 120 miles an hour. So, you know, that's not where you want to be. Torque is what you want to build for a street bike, not horsepower. Torque's what stretches your arms out and pushes your eyeballs in the back of your head. Horsepower is what gets you up to 140 miles, what gets you running 140. And we can't do that too much around here. But we can sure feel that torque when we're taking off from a stoplight or hitting a expressway on-ramp or something. It's that torque that puts the fun in the motor. Any questions on that? Okay. Big bore kit's very popular. Thing about big bore kit, and it's true, no substitute for cubic inches. But there's also a lot of other things you got to think about. First of all, if it's an older bike, you want to put a big bore kit on it. Let's say you got a 650 T120 Triumph, an old 69, 70 model. And you want to take it from a 650 to a 750. Well, the 750 kits are out there, they're very good. But is your bottom end up to it? You've never been in the bottom end, you know, how about your rod bearings? How about your main bearings? How about the crank? You're going to put a lot more pressure on the engine when you do that. So you got to make sure that it's up to par. There again, is the cylinder head up to the task of complementing displacement increase? Will the exhaust carbs and camshaft be compatible to deliver what you're paying for in that big bore kit? You know, those are things you got to ask. You'll probably spend $1,000 or so putting a big bore kit on it. But if you got lousy carburetors and no ignition or no adequate ignition, big bore kit's not going to do you much good. And you go say, "Wow, I spent this money and I'm not getting the performance I thought I would get." Well, just the fact of just putting a big bore kit on it is not necessarily going to give you what you think you're going to get or what you're trying to get, unless you complement it with everything else. There's no one big large area in these engines that's going to give you a real kind of kick in the pants. It's a combination. It's the stacking up of what you're trying to do and adding to it, everything complementing each other that makes it worthwhile doing and make sure that you're getting kind of good value for your money. So, I was talking to someone earlier, I think they had a 250 Honda with a big bore kit or something. Who was that I was talking to?
Yeah, we were talking about boring out the sleeves.
Yeah, that's right, we're talking about re-sleeving, yeah. And your 250 Honda had a big bore kit in it already, and you're taking it back down to standard again?
And went up one more size.
Went up more and more size on big bore kit.
Goes.
Okay. Yeah. But, big bore kit's a good way to go, especially if you're trying to get a little more torque out of it. The cylinder head modifications, there again, we talked on that a little earlier. It's, when you have your cylinder head done, if it's a motorcycle cylinder, you know, a motorcycle cylinder head on the most part doesn't belong in an automotive head rebuilding, just facility. A guy that is real good on small block Chevys or Fords may not be that good on a Triumph or a BMW or a Ducati. He's more than likely not going to have the right tools, and you might end up going backwards. I've seen a lot of heads that had 50,000 miles on them before they left the workbench. So valve guide work, and valve seat work. We were talking about that. I was talking about that with Lee today when we were downstairs talking. And motorcycles require a little bit of different expertise than automobile heads. So just be careful who you let work on your precious vintage equipment. And just do a little talking around and find somebody that's capable, that has the equipment and everything, so your money will be well spent. And we're gonna get into a little port work here. Talk about that improperly modified head rented engine, useless and unreliable. Big ports and high flow numbers do not necessarily mean increased torque and horsepower. I see this all the time. People bring me cylinder heads and they've gone in there and they just ruined the casting. It's you can't do anything with it. You go in there and do some welding, but it's a cost feasibility thing. What is often overlooked by those attempting to port the head is the velocity of the air through the port. The velocity is so important. A large port can move some large airflow numbers. However, what is overlooked at the port velocity numbers? Air velocity is critical to achieve maximum cylinder fill, the term volumetric efficiency. The whole idea is to get as much cylinder pack, much air and fuel mixture packed through that cylinder as possible. And if the velocity is not enough, there's some magic numbers that we look at on velocity figures. And anything, and you can have too much velocity too. But anything above or below a certain, what we call a Mach number when we're actually doing the port configurations is what we're looking at. And there's kind of a sweet spot in there that we want to look for. And taking a grinder and a sandpaper wheel and making that port bigger, you're killing your intake velocity. So here we go. The volumetric efficiency is defined as the ratio of the volume of the intake charge flowed through the intake tract to the full piston displacement velocity. Most engines are going to be down around, some of the older engines down around 75%. Some of the newer engines, 82, 85, you can get, through proper tuning, you can get over 100% over a small RPM range by the proper intake tuning and exhaust tuning. The higher the volumetric efficiency, the more the cylinder is filled and the higher potential for power. And that's torque. It's going to produce torque for you. Increasing volumetric efficiency is done by port and valve seat configuration, camshaft design, carb intake manifold design is also design. and this is a good example here. On many of the British vintage twin heads, the port size is approximately 1 3/16, 30 millimeter. All your Traps, Nortons, DSAs, they're all got a 30 millimeter port. A straight tube of that OD with a properly shaped velocity stack will flow enough air to support a horsepower potential in excess of 60 for a single cylinder. Now, you know you're not getting 60 horsepower out of both your cylinders. So that goes to show you that's not your restriction. It's when the port bends that the volumetric efficiency drops off. Air doesn't like, especially air that's emulsified with fuel, doesn't like to bend over 15-degree angle. You know, that was all, when we lost our lead, everybody was saying that our motors were going to die a terrible death because of the valve seats were not going to be protected by the lead in the gas anymore. I've seen that to be the case in some motors. We have a lot of problem with the mid-80s BMW airhead twins. We have a lot of valve, we see them coming in with a lot of valve seat recession, still see it. But not so much, that is not so much caused by the gasoline as it is caused by a compatibility problem between the material that BMW used in the valve seat and the valve that they were using. And they recognized that problem. They even sent out a service bulletin on it. And they tried different things to try to keep it going. They went from a 45-degree valve contact seat to a 30-degree, trying to spread it out a little bit. But what it was just a problem with the valve seat. We take the valve seats out, the exhaust side. You don't even have to do the intake sides. We put a better seat in it, machine the seat, and they're down the road for a long time. Most of the time, the seats that I have to replace are not have to be replaced because of a wear problem. They have to be replaced because somebody got in there and tried to do a valve job on it and just ground everything out of them. And your stem protrusion was affected and created a problem. When I say stem protrusion, the amount that the valve stem protrudes out of the head on the spring side. And it creates rocker arm problems, geometry problems. On an overhead valve motor, it gets it out of the range of the adjustment shims. So I don't see as much actual valve seat recession on some of these older bikes as you think you would. And another thing that happens is over a period of years, the valve seat becomes what we call work hardened. It's been through a lot of heat cycles, the valve's been landing on the seat a bunch, and it actually hardens the seat. You know, if you got an old bike, and it's a dead giveaway when you have to constantly adjust your valves that you're having a valve seat recession problem. So if you're seeing that, yeah, you might want to consider putting seats in at that point. And there's a lot of good seats out there that we can put in these edges that will help it out. But just the fact of just putting a seat in one during a rebuild, even if it was damaged from years of people grinding on it, trying to do valve jobs on it, it'll really bring the performance back in that motor. It gets the valve back up in the chamber where it needs to be, and then you can get your spring height set back again. And works real well. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, Lee?
Now, when I had my machine job, we worked on both cars and bikes. I just used a different size hammer. No, but seriously about the lead gas, we saw the problem on the car side because a lot of times the valve seat was a cast iron.
That's exactly right. You'll see it in automobiles
Yeah, they didn't have a step.
because they didn't have valve seats. You know, like the old MGs and Triumphs and
Aluminum heads, of course, had these.
and the valve seat was just the cast iron cylinder head material.
But like you said, if one came in that was used, it actually kind of hardened it. When you went to do the valve job and you ground through that work hardening, it would recede right on through.
You got that right. And that work hardening was only about 4,000 or 5,000 down in there. But, yeah, most of our motorcycle heads have seats in it. But yeah, we see that. I do a lot of, old, British sports car heads too. And I do a lot of, people bring me, I guess I got a reputation for understanding the British equipment, and they'll bring me, says, well, you do these Triumphs and Nortons, what can you do with my MG head here? I said, well, we can put seats in it. And
Glutton for punishment.
yeah, you know, and do a lot of Jag heads, but they have seats in, unfortunately, and they do real well. But anyway, any more questions on that while we're there? Yes, sir.
Rock fuel, you mentioned the unleaded. Do you see a lot of changes with the ethanol-based fuels? Are you seeing problems with that?
The ethanol-based fuels are nothing but problems. Especially on our old motorcycles that are vented to the atmosphere, you know, they're vented through the gas tank. You have a situation called dephasing, where the alcohol or the ethanol in the fuel, after it sets for a while, will actually phase out, just stratify. You can get your glass jar and go get you some ethanol fuel and put it in a glass jar and just put it on a shelf somewhere and just watch what happens to it over a period of weeks. And what will happen, it will form a pure layer of water on the bottom. You'll have another stratified layer of ethanol, then you'll have on the top a layer of gasoline that's got an octane rating of about 75 or 80. And that's why when you leave this ethanol fuel in your fuel tanks, how many of you got pinholes in your fuel tanks that just popped up all of a sudden, you know? Y'all run into that? See, I've had a lot of BMWs have little pinholes. Fuel just starts leaking out the bottom of them on some of the K-bikes and things from the fuel stratifying, and the water sat down there and causing corrosion in the aluminum tanks, and then you got a hole. It happened. I've got a case 75 myself that I had that happen to it. So, but yeah, the ethanol fuel, and they say some of it works. I'm not sure how all this fuel additives treatments work. The Briggs and Stratton stuff is supposed to be pretty good, and I've used it, and so far it's held up pretty well. It's called Briggs and Stratton Advanced Formula Fuel Treatment and Stabilizer, and it's supposed to really be effective in preventing the dephasing of the ethanol fuel. I don't know. I know a lot of the stuff that's sold does not. And we have a good friend in Memphis. We have a little get together in Memphis every Wednesday night during the winter months where we go to different people's garages and we do something very similar to this. We have little presentations, talk amongst ourselves mostly, but they're having one in Memphis tonight about ethanol fuel. And he went and did a whole lot of research on this, and he came up with some interesting conclusions. So you can read about it. A lot of the boat guys have this problem too. So if you're interested in it, read about it on the internet. It's you'll be surprised at what you come up with.
Leo,
Yes.
any of the racing fuels have ethanol based?
Yeah, some of them do. Racing, and that's another thing. Racing fuel is good, but it doesn't store well. And we ran into this a couple of years ago. I had a guy that called me and said, "Hey, my motor I'm burning holes in my pistons after the race." I said, "Were you too lean?" He said, "No, I'm not too lean." He said, "I got exhaust gas temperatures. I'm measuring. I go to the dyno measure brake specific fuel consumption." So he said, "I know I'm not too lean. I know my ignition's good." I said, "We'll do 2 or 3 races and I'll have a hole in the piston." I said, "Well, you gotta be getting detonation." You know, he said, "Well, I'm running, I said, what fuel you running? So I'm running VP C12, I think. And I said, well, do this. I said, take some of that fuel and bring me a sample of it. I'm gonna send it off and get it looked at. So we sent it off to a lab. It came back with an 87 octane rating. And the guy at the fuel lab said this fuel's just old. He's lost all the aromatic hydrocarbons have left the fuel. So I called him back and I said, hey, how old's that fuel? He said, oh, I've got a barrel. I've had it about a year and a half. I said, well, there's your problem. So it was a rude awakening for him, but the fuel lost its octane rating. And it was a little drag motor in a bike. So anyway, so keep that in mind. The fuel doesn't last forever. And this ethanol fuel, it's golly. I got a KLR 650 that I ride sometimes, and I got it out, and the carburetor the low-speed jet was stopped up in it from setting, so I cleaned it all out, cleaned everything, put brand new fuel in it, take it out, ride it, having a good time riding, it's doing good. I take it back, I park it. 3 weeks later, I go back out there, and the doggone carburetor's popped up again. And I pull the float ball off, and I'm looking at it, and it's got water in it from the ethanol fuel. And I'm thinking, good grief. I said, 3 weeks, but drain the gas out of it, put new gas in it, and at the end of the riding, I just get the gas out of it and drain the carburetor. It was lasting. The ethanol fuel wasn't even good for 3 weeks of storage. So it's a real problem.
I've been keeping my CBX. I'm always afraid of the carbs, the 6-cylinder stopping up. I've been keeping race gas in it. Am I doing it?
Yeah. Well, I think you're okay. It'll lose its octane rating after a while, but all you gotta do is drain it out, put some new, some fresh gas in it.
It doesn't varnish up like regular gas.
It sure doesn't. It doesn't varnish up like regular gas. Avgas won't either, but
Avgas has a lot of lead in it, so
Avgas got a lot of lead in it, and that could be a problem too. Too much.
What about running avgas at sea level? I've always heard that was a joke.
Pardon?
I always heard that avgas was meant to run at altitude. And running at
Avgas is formulated differently. It's slow burning because most airplane engines don't rev what our motorcycle engines rev, especially your CPX. And it's got a lot of lead in it, which too much is a problem too. And it's designed for slow. It's designed for low RPM engines, and you can weigh a gallon of avgas and weigh a gallon of pump gas, and it'll weigh different. They don't have they leave out what's called the high-end hydrocarbons out of the avgas because those engines don't need it, and our motorcycle engines do need it. So, but it will store for I think it's got to be certified for 2 years storage. I think Yeah, a good high octane race fuel is good to store with. That to answer your question.
Well, the first thing is Argo's got regular gas up there. But the other thing is additives like Startron, they're supposed to take the alcohol out. Have you had any experience?
It doesn't work, in my opinion.
Okay.
That's just based on throwing a little in some ethanol fuel. The Startron, everybody says it works, but I don't know. I'm not gonna say the product's not working, but I haven't had the results that would. It's not gonna take the ethanol out. It's not gonna take it out. What they're gonna try to do is keep it from dephasing, from separating. And I don't know. You just have to kind of get some ethanol ethanol gas and put it in a jar and pour some in it and let it set for a while and see what happens. Yes, sir.
For fun, pull the material data safety sheets for these various additives,
Yes,
and you'll find in StarTron, a lot of these things are more of the same kind of problem you're trying to solve.
it's
It's not necessarily more ethanol, but it might be more methanol.
exactly. Ethanol, methanol, wood alcohol, that's what methanol is. It's highly corrosive.
But the material data safety sheets are wonderful.
Yeah. They're required to do that, but I don't know, has anybody used any fuel additive that they've had excellent results with here? I sure like to know. Nobody. Yes,
I can't say that I've had excellent results, but I did have an occasion to have a conversation with a guy from Stable. And I said, look, you make all these different products. And, I try like hell to just buy ethanol free. And even then, I'll put some stabilizer in it. But I said, when it's all said and done, which of these products do you really need? He said, hands down, the marine formula.
yeah,
He said, that's the best product that they make. So,
I've heard the same thing.
and you mentioned it before, but I think that Briggs and Stratton, it gets high marks too.
They say it's good. I've used it so far. It seems to have helped. But I think the jury's still out on most of this stuff. We're getting near the end of our thing here. Talk about airflow not like turn quarters, anything more than 15-degree creates issues. The valve stem angle compound. That's in your port work. Right here, we're looking at all your action in your port is generally right around this area right here that's got the green around it. Everything. That's the biggest thing you can do is get a good valve job on it and everything. I had just in closing here, I had I've done quite a bit of work with air-cooled Porsches too, because it's kind of like just a big flat motorcycle engine, you might say. But I was working with Porsche race team out of Bruno's Porsche. And I got a set of heads done by somebody who was supposed to be real good on it, and I'm sure they probably were, but they put the heads on their 3.6 air-cooled Porsche motor, trying to do dyno pulls, and the motor lost all its torque and barely made any power at an RPM that was probably really outside the RPM range that motor should be operated in. And they spent a lot of money on these heads. And they said, and at the time, Bob Snodgrass, who was running the program, he's passed away now, but he's a good friend of mine. He says, hey, I got these heads that we spent a ton of money on, and they're not producing. He says, can I send them down to you, get you to look at them? I said, sure, I don't know if I can do anything for you, but I'll be glad to look at them. Well, I got the heads down the shop, put them on a flow bench and looked at them, and my calculations showed that the port sizes and the port configurations, the velocity was so poor that motor, to produce any kind of power, would have had to turn 19,000 RPMs. So quite obviously, it wasn't right. So I called Bob and told him, he said, man, this is what I need to do. I said, you got a set of stock heads up there? He said, yeah. I said, send me down a set of stock heads. I took a set of stock heads, just cleaned the ports up a little bit, but did a really, really good seat valve job, what we call a valve job, where we, put the different angles on the seat down there. And they were kind of in a time crunch because they had to make the Sebring in 24 hours. And I said, take these heads, put on it, and dyno it up and call me back and let me know what it did. So they put the heads on everything. He called me back, he was elated. He said, we've got 15 more horsepower we've ever had before in this motor. He said, we're just dumbfounded. And everything. We look at the heads, they don't look much different than a stock head. I said, well, put it on and run it and see where you go. But that just goes to show you that just because it looks good, you can't really hold a ported head in your hand and really look at it and really tell what it's going to do. Some of the worst looking stuff I've ever seen ran great. Some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever seen wouldn't get out of its own way. So, port work is all very critical. Here we're talking about the effects of the valve seats on the flow. What you do, the angles that you use, the radiuses you use on the valve seat has an awful lot to do with how that motor's going to perform, how the airflow goes. You've all heard of the three angle valve job, 30, 45, 60. Just helps the air turn the corner. It also does some other things in the combustion chamber that, from a technical aspect, probably doesn't belong in this seminar, but that's where you can really change it. This kind of shows the different angles of the valve job. We're using a series of radiuses and angles, and we're using, instead of a 45-degree seat, if it's a race motor, we'll go to a 50 or a 52-degree seat. If it's a motor that's running in class where the camshaft's limited, we'll go to a 30-degree seat to try to improve low lift airflow, all in an effort to try to get the volumetric efficiency up. So all kind of little tricks you can do. To work them angles out, you just got to go to the flow bench and start experimenting with it and spending an awful lot of time and hoping that what you do will work out in actual conditions. There again, talking about the flowing and the porting and polishing. A lot of people, when they send the head off to somebody, they get poured and polished, they expect that the intake port, the exhaust port be polished to a mirror finish. Well, that's actually detrimental on the intake side to performance. On the exhaust side, I do like a polished port because I want to reflect the heat back into the port and out the exhaust to keep the velocity up in the exhaust. But there again, over a period of time on a street bike, you're going to get a layer of carbon built up on that port. So any kind of polishing in the exhaust port is gone. But that carbon serves as a real good insulator to keep that heat in the port, which is what you want to do. You want kind of not a rough finish on your intake, but you certainly don't want a highly polished on your intake for a number of reasons. You can, if you're interested in that, you can go to the internet and look it up. Airflow is not intuitive. It is to a certain point, but what you think that air is doing and what it's actually doing are two different things. The intake port, I always finish mine out. Most of your good port people will deliberately test you to a degree of uniform roughness to encourage the fuel deposits on port walls to evaporate quickly. Textured intake port wall and selected areas port can serve to alter flow by promoting the boundary layer, which can alter the flow path noticeably, serving to increase flow. I think I've got some boundary layer examples here. There's a good way to explain boundary layer is go look at a fast-moving river or a fast-moving stream. And out in the middle of it in the channel, the water's moving pretty quick, but up there next to the bank, it's not moving hardly at all. It's just kind of maybe little eddy currents. That's the same thing you get in a port. Very fundamentally speaking. But first layer of the molecules here, the wall, and does not move significantly. So this boundary layer will build up with speed. Of course, you want to correct any mismatches in between your head and your manifolds. That does help to do that, so you don't have that bump there. I know we're running out of time here. I'm trying to get back to this. About cams. Before you go to change a cam in a motor, you ought to really do some look and find out what works good. You can advance retard the cam for some tuning sometimes, depending on how your motor's performing. There again, void cabs with high lifts and long durations on a street motor, starting hours, quality, throttle response, reliability, overall rideability, that feel when you hit your throttle. They all suffer when you overcam. And that's it. We have any questions? I think we've about run out of time here. Have we, Jen?
Yes, sir, but if we got any questions, we can.
I'll be glad to answer any questions. We can open up a discussion and
Leo, how about using a dollar from clocks in a four-stroke engine?
use a what?
Clocks, two-stroke.
Using a two-stroke
Just
oil in a four-stroke engine?
Maybe 200 to 1, something like that. The fuel and the fuel.
I would, no. I wouldn't do that. Why would you want to do that?
Well, years ago, 750 Honda, Bardol had a product called Top Oil.
That's right.
It was for upper cylinder lubrication.
That's right.
And I always thought maybe.
You know what that does, don't you? That Bardol top oil, that upper cylinder lubricant, it is supposed to have a flash point higher than the combustion flash point. So it doesn't actually burn. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, you don't want to burn oil you don't want to burn oil in the chamber in a four-stroke. We go to a lot of trouble to keep oil out of the combustion chamber. It also causes detonation. So I would not, I don't think that's a good idea. That's my opinion, you know, for what it's worth, but I would not, I want pure gasoline in my gas tank. I don't want any oil, I don't want any octane additives, I don't, you know, you can have some fuel preservatives in there, necessary evil, but I don't want any octane boosters. Most of that stuff's snake oil. You cannot add lead to unleaded fuel. All this lead active stuff, for one thing, you know, the lead is illegal to sell, and it's not lead anyway, but you can't put any kind of additive to cause your unleaded fuel to turn into a leaded fuel. And now I believe I wouldn't, it's not something I would recommend or condone. If it's working for you, if you think it helps you, well, that's fine. But not anything I want to do or tell any of my customers or friends to do. Anything else? We're all good? We got one more question. We're gonna grab that.
The other day I saw, I don't remember where it was, I don't know if it was Carter or Holly, some kind of a conversion kit. This was on a car thing. And it looked just like an old 4-barrel carburetor. There's a fuel injection unit. And the ad was like, just bolt on fuel injection. I think.
On an automobile?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was for like $2,000 or something like that.
Yeah, what they have a throttle body that you take your 4-barrel off, put this throttle body on, and it's fuel injection. It's not port injection, obviously, like everything has now. But at one point, some of the General Motors stuff, I think, had what's called throttle body injection on it. But it was all problematic, I think. But I don't know. I'm not much of a car
Well,
guy on that from that standpoint.
what I was wondering was on old bikes, if you wanna make them more rideable, is there any kind of a kit like that?
No, not that I'm aware of. You'd have to kind of custom make that yourself, which I've done. But nothing on the market that's just going to bolt on to an engine. You're going to have instant fuel injection and everything. Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for having me down.